Hey, how you doing? My name is Brian Steed. I'm Chief of Staff for Congressman Chris Stewart. And I got to admit, I'm having a little bit of a flashback because it turns out that before taking this job, I worked at Utah State University as a professor, taught economics, super dry, and it was always right after lunch. And the only thing we were missing here today is I used to have a big whiteboard behind that I was able to go up and mark on the whiteboard how many students in my class were sleeping. So I'm watching. Here's the thing. Before I get into my presentation, which is death by PowerPoint and what I'll refer to as verbal narcolepsy, you're free to fall asleep. I want to know how many of you guys are involved in the ranching and ag industry. Actually, stand up. I'm curious. Ag industry, people that stand up. And I want to acknowledge you guys because there's a lot of folks, I mean, we recognize the congressional staffers and whatever else. You can sit down. Before you do, I want you guys to give yourself a round of applause. And the reason is because you are the true American heroes. You're the people that make this country work. Because I depend on you on a daily basis to eat. And I don't think you guys get the credit that you deserve. And I guess that the whole justification of this conference is that we all understand that you guys are facing difficult circumstances. Is that fair? And I get the sense from the people that have been here today and the interactions I've had, you're feeling a little down about the circumstances right now, right? A little down, fair enough. This conference hasn't been necessarily a lot of an upper, right? Okay, so hopefully we can have a little good news out of this. I can't overpromise that it'll be good news, but I can say that you do have advocates and allies on your side. And I want to introduce how we can best do that. And we'll see if this works. Okay, so why am I here? This is a little dark. I want to point out this guy right here. So as I said, I'm Chief of Staff for Congressman Chris Stewart. This man rocking the Dickies right here, that's Congressman Chris Stewart when he was growing up. He worked on a dairy farm. This is a day on the job with his family. It looks like it's from the Great Depression. I guess it looks like that in Cache Valley. But I want to point out that my boss certainly understands the work that you do on a daily basis. He took time off this fall from his day-to-day activities to go out with his brothers on a roundup. Because he understands that that's the joy of his work. When he was in the Air Force, he would tell you if he were here today, and by the way, he apologizes for not being here, but he would tell you if he were here today that he feels that the best times of his life have been on roundups with his brothers. It's when he feels most in tune with the land and most in tune with his family, and he gets the most joy out of life. You guys got to understand that that's a beautiful thing that you guys get to participate in day to day. And so pat yourselves on the back for that. But that's why I'm here, because my boss puts a premium on this. He puts a high importance on getting this right and making sure that you guys are getting the service that you need from our office. So, for that. Part of the problem, we've already covered this ad nauseum today. It's a fancy lawyer word to me, it's a lot. So, here's the deal. This map shows population of the United States. The redder, the darker the red, more density, right? What do you notice about this map? Oddly enough, it's almost the inverse of this map. Right? And this map shows percent of public land ownership, and it's actually surface, subsurface of all federal lands. Right? So we got, wait. Let's go back. Sorry. I'm jumping ahead. So we've got one more back, if I can. It won't let me. Anyways, here's the thing. The population centers are not where we live. That's in part because we live where there's so much public land. And that's in part because it's just the breakdown of the demographics of where people have moved. They moved to urban centers. That creates a bit of a political problem for us because I work in Washington, D.C., which sometimes is the bane of my existence. But I work there every day, right, with people that just don't get it. Because when I talk about public lands, they have a different perception of my interaction with public lands. They have a different perception of what public lands are. And let me give you a for instance. So I'm a recovering attorney. I left the practice of law. I was practicing actually in Iron County as a deputy county attorney, and I did all of their prairie dog stuff, which was very exciting, and all their land use stuff as well, which also was very exciting. And I left there because I was passionate about all this public land stuff, and I went to Indiana University because my professor there was into this kind of local resource management and trying to figure out how we can get locals more empowered, and that's why I chose to go there. And I got to Indiana, and I realized that nobody knew anything about what the West is like. And this is, just as a for instance, this is actually the official state seal of Indiana. I love this. What do you see in the state seal of Indiana? You see a guy cutting down the last tree in the scene and scaring out the last wildlife. Right? And so when Indianans think about public land, they think at it in these contexts, right? Because they think that we're operating in a scarcity of public land. This is their reality. So in Indiana, so this yellow right here, this is the Hoosier National Forest, okay? Wasn't created at the time because the feds didn't keep ownership of it. In fact, this is created after the fact, right? They went back and lobbied Congress to create a national forest because they wanted to have public land so badly, right? What percentage of public land is Indiana? I don't know the answer to that question, but from the map, you can see it's not very much. This is Utah, right? All of the different colors represent different land management agencies, right? As has been mentioned previously, we have, 67% owned, right? But we've got counties in the 2nd District that, if you include state and county lands, that are 97% owned by a government agency. 97%. And what makes that interesting is when I talk about that with my colleagues in Washington, D.C., they have no concept of what that even looks like. They have no concept of the difficulties that creates for each one of us in this room. And let me give you just a for instance. Interestingly, we have an intern in our office this semester who was a friend of the congressman. He's from Tennessee, okay? You guys know what county this is right here? Kane County, right? There's a documentary out right now. It's on Netflix. I'm not extolling it. It's called Unbranded. You all seen it? Some of you seen it. Beautiful, beautiful landscapes and whatever else. And it's an interesting story, and it's kind of fair on the horse issue. However, there's this scene in Unbranded that I think totally shows the ignorance, or maybe even the willful deceit, right? Because there's a scene where the guys that are riding the Mustangs across public land, what do they get to? Private land. Right there in Kane County, right outskirts of Kanab, and they have a terrible conversation with the landowner who then makes them go around. And really, it's not explicit, but it's certainly implied that, wow, that's a big problem, that private land ownership. In a county with 97% federal ownership, or 97% public ownership, 94% federal ownership, they had to seek out that conflict in order to have that. And so I think it just goes to show that we operate in a bit of a hard political world. Now, Easterners see the world differently than the Westerners do, and so that leads to conflict. We see the lands as being our livelihood. And I would go even further than that and say our way of life, right? Because my grandfather, my great-grandfather, he's the guy that went out and rescued the Martin and Willie Handcart companies when they got stuck in the snow, right? That's the work that he put in to founding this place, right? He broke this land in order for me to live here. And so that's our heritage, and that's the way we perceive the world we live in. Others from the outside frequently perceive land as something that needs to be protected, a place to be visited sparingly, tread lightly upon, and preserved forever. Have you heard this before? Right? And most people outside of Utah, or from outside of the West especially, have no idea that places like this even exist. They don't know. Because they think that they've seen a nature documentary of what the West looks like, and so therefore they understand the West. I tell you this not as a downer, because you've had plenty of that today. I tell you this to know that what we're up against, okay? We have real conflict over land use right now. We get that. We have conflict, but I want to tell you guys, this is not the first time we've had conflict over land use. We've had farmers versus ranchers, right? Is your county a fence-out or a fence-in county? Do you know? Right? Fence out. Why is it a fence-out county? Well, not all. It's actually Utah's can break down. But why is it a fence-out county? Who said fence-out? Why is it fence-out? Fair enough. And it's also to keep your cows out of their crops, right? And so there is that notion, who has the burden to do this, right? What I'm saying is we've had these conflicts in the past, cattlemen versus sheepmen, conflicts between ranchers, miners versus ranchers, hunters versus ranchers, and the list goes on and on and on, right? What I'm saying is right now we have a conflict of land use that's going on too. And what I'd like you to take away from this is all is not lost, right? That while it is hard, yes, and while there's difficulties, that there are people out there working every single day for your benefit. And I can tell you that many of those people are in this room because I work with them. And they work really hard on these issues. And I want you guys to use us to do what we can do. Now, I can't promise success, but I can say that I spend my days on this side of the building working almost every single day. And Cam is the guy that does this as well. And Gary as well in Utah. We work frequently on public lands issues. The 2nd District is probably 87% federally owned. We are, by far and away, the largest public land district in Utah. I haven't done the math on this, but I bet you we're the #1 public land district in the nation. We deal with this, and so we understand the issues. So, what can we do? Let's go some of the things we can do. And we've got until when, Randy?
Another 10 minutes.
Another 10 minutes. Okay, so we have individual cases, okay? So Ron was talking about some of the things that our offices do. We have the legislative side and we have the casework side. On the casework side, we take individual cases, people that have difficulty with federal agencies, and we help them alleviate some of those problems. Now, we're not all the time successful, but we are successful a lot. And so, if you guys are having problems where you're losing, and I don't know how many it was, how many AUMs was it, or how many acres did we lose? 170,000. That's something that we should know about. Okay, so let's talk about that after, and that's not just a glib invitation. That's something that we should be working on as well, all right? And so please use us on that. And so this is what we do. We frequently have individual meetings with the agencies. We talk about that. We talk about how we can resolve, and we work somewhat as mediators, although we're not the average mediator in the sense that Congress has the ability to control the purse strings, and we'll get that in a little bit. But so there is some more power that we can bring to bear than your average mediator. So we've arranged meetings with heads of agencies over individual cases. I can say that last year about this time, on a separate case, on a coal case, we actually had the head of Fish and Wildlife and the head of the BLM in the office saying, you know what, guys, it's time to fix it and stopping to blame one another. And they promised action, right? We're still working on that case. We're not done yet, but I can tell you that we were able to facilitate those meetings, and if we can facilitate those meetings on your behalf, I think that's a win. We've sent letters to individual agency heads. We've sent letters to individual agencies downstream, and we have resolved cases. In order to do this successfully, my friends, we need specifics. So if you're having problems with a particular land management agency, I need you to tell me the what, where, how, and when this took place. And I need you to tell me those details with sufficient clarity that we're able then to attack in a more meaningful way. Because sometimes what we get is a lot of emotion. They're screwing us, and we get that. But we need the details of what exactly is happening, right? And so that we're able to attack more meaningfully. We're able to provide legislative relief. Now, I can tell you Congress is screwed up. You know that. It's a very partisan, and there's a divide. But I can say that we have introduced meaningful legislation. And that meaningful legislation has made progress. The grazing bill in the Grand Staircase, we sponsored that in the House. It will have a hearing. It will move in the House. It has already moved in the Senate, meaning that it was the committee and the Senate side has already taken that up, has already said, yes, this is something we should pursue, and got it out. That's progress, and we keep moving that ball down the road. And we've done this on a variety of things, and frankly, sometimes we've done this in order to raise the issue. For instance, we introduced the Wild Horse Oversight Act. It's the clever acronym WHOA, right? Which I came up with, which was maybe my crowning achievement in Congress, actually. But the Wild Horse Oversight Act, which is intended to say, hey, the federal government is strapped for cash. They are out of ideas. It's time to treat this like any other animal. that's not endangered or migratory and put it within the state's jurisdiction. It's a pretty simple idea, right? That in and of itself, we haven't passed that legislation yet, but we have had meaningful conversations with the BLM in order to say maybe we start a pilot program to that effect. And I don't know, I can't claim credit for this, but I can say that SITLA and BLM recently, or the State Institutional Trust Lands Association or Administration, recently reached an agreement where they're able to manage some of those horses on SITLA parcels. It's a big deal. You don't like that? We're shaking our heads. I haven't yet. Good. Okay, so. So what I would say, though, is this. Fair case in point. What I would say is that's the kind of feedback we need so that we can improve this sort of stuff, right? So that's good, okay? Lastly, we're working on bills right now to promote grazing on public land statewide. Next, appropriations. One of the things we do, my boss sits on appropriations. Do you guys know what the Appropriations Committee is? What is it? It's the money arm of Congress. These are the people that decide not how much money we will spend, but where the money will be spent, right? And so this is actually a meaningful committee to be on, and we're able to do certain things. Now, to be clear, because there's a lot of confusion, people say, well, Congress controls the purse strings. Have you heard this before? That's true, but Congress constitutionally has to have a vote in the House and in the Senate. The Senate's been harder to get over time for reasons because it's a closer divide in terms of the bipartisan split. And then it has to be signed by the president. And this president hasn't been very willing to work with this on a variety of issues. However, that's not to say that all is lost, because we've had decent language put in to spending bills, one of which we said no money shall be spent on listing the sage grouse. We put that in there. Now, it's not there yet. We're not, so I can say this was 2 years ago. Was the sage grouse listed? It wasn't, and it wasn't in part because they couldn't. They couldn't spend money on doing that. And so that's a meaningful win. We're not there yet. I know that BLM has RMPs, and we're working on fixing that language this time around. But I'm telling you that there are wins that we can do. Another we got through the appropriations bill last time as well was that no money shall be spent on regulating irrigation ditches by the EPA, which was something they were interested in doing. Who thinks that's a good idea? Yeah, nobody. Okay. So I'm just saying, if there's things you need us to do on the spending side, let us know. Next, we frequently get agency answers on the record, and I know I'm running out of time, so I'll be very, we have hearings. In those hearings, we ask hard questions, and sometimes we get agency heads to admit things. 2 years ago, we had the Secretary of Interior in. We slipped a question, so Chris, my boss, Chris Stewart, was asking questions, and he said, so do you think it's a good idea to count all animals in order to determine whether or not it's endangered or not? Right? And Sally Jewell said, of course it is. We always do that. And we were able to say, no, you actually don't. Because in the Utah Prairie Dog, you only count the dogs on public land. Right? Yeah, federal land. You're right, federal land. Thank you. On federal land, right? Which seems so stupid. Because you've created essentially a migration program onto private lands, and it turns out if you were to count them on private lands, they wouldn't be endangered. Right? And so we were to say, you said, is this a good idea? She said, no, it's not a good idea. And we were able to bludgeon her later and say, we don't think it's a good idea. You don't think it's a good idea. Perhaps we ought not do that. That has helped the state in terms of their state management plan of the prairie dog. And so that's the sort of stuff that we're able to do. Next, oversight. We're in a great position for oversight in the state. We have two chairmen. Chairman Bishop, who's in charge of the Natural Resources Committee. Chairman Chaffetz, who's in charge of the Oversight Committee. Both these committees have jurisdiction over parts of public land management agencies. And so consider, if that's the case, and if they want hard questions asked of public land agencies, do so through these gentlemen. We're also happy to do that anytime as well. And as was mentioned, the Senate doesn't have light hitters either. Senator Lee, not only is he on the Committee of Jurisdiction over these issues, but he's also on the chair of the Senate Steering Committee, which is that right? Right? Which is in charge of setting Senate policy, which is a big deal. And Senator Hatch, as chairman of finance, has a lot of SWAT too. So I'm just saying that we have an opportunity to engage in Utah. Use your congressional delegation. So last thing we do, and I'll just be real brief on this, we evangelize to our colleagues. One of the things that we've done as an office with Mr. Bishop's office is start the Federal Land Action Group to examine ways that we can encourage our colleagues in the House to start considering ways where we can have more local management of the federal estate. We think it's a good idea and it makes sense, right? And we're encouraging our colleagues to do so as well. It is evangelizing, right? There are a lot of people who don't see that, and so we're working slowly, but that's, I think, part of the work we do. Lastly, and I'll close on this. Listen, when we talk about American things and what makes America great, this is the image that comes to people's minds. We have all seen the movies. You guys operate on a moral high ground that I think we need to take advantage of. So my encouragement is to you that we operate with the white hats on and that we don't get pinned as the Al-Qaeda, right? Which some people have started pinning on different angry actions in the West, right? If we get into that category of being radicalized, we start losing our ability to actually influence the public conversation. Right now, if you can say this is the death of the American cowboy, that means something. Because we all care about the fate of the cowboy. And let us engage on your behalf. Please let us know how it can be helpful. And we're around, so there's a bunch of us. So let us know. Thank you so much.